Buy, sell or rent out your property with Century 21 and you could win a 2-bedroom apartment on the Sunshine Coast worth over $400,000. Visit c21win.com.au to find out how.
Hello, welcome to Your Property Empire. I'm Charles Tarbey, and on tonight's show, actually, we are going to find out a whole bunch of things tonight. We're going to find out where the best suburbs are, the world's best suburbs, and I've got some great guests with me tonight. My good old mate Tom Panos is here tonight from News Limited, which is great to see, and we also have a new... Is this your first time?
No, I've been on a few times.
You've been on before with Chris, have you? Nerida Constantine.
Yes.
And Nerida's also... You're an analyst with REA.
Yeah, I'm their chief economist.
And how long have you been doing that for now?
2 months.
2 months? What were you doing
so pretty brand new. Head of research at Colliers International. Before that, I was with JLL for 6.5 years.
That's a very strong background. So, and you're here with Tom, who knows a lot about real estate. Where is Chris?
So Chris is in Vietnam, and what he's done is he's outsourced his weaknesses and he's working his strengths. And what are his strengths? Sitting around at resorts, enjoying himself while we're out there.
He always does a pretty good job of that. Well, we're going to go and look at the hottest rental suburbs as well, Australia's fastest moving suburbs, what to do with home buyers, what they're looking for and how they're going to get into the marketplace as well. So I think we'll cover that. We'll also cover the normal stats, Tom, and we're going to go through... How many properties have you got tonight?
We've got 2 properties that we're going to look at. We've got one in Queensland and one in Victoria. Right. So we'll cover those, and yeah, we'll cover what real estate agents are talking about. But I know that Nerida, I was talking off camera with her, and she was telling me about the most. Well, firstly, she was telling me about Peter Hillier's, the comedian, property. Okay. That is the most searched property on realestate.com.au?
That's right. So we look at, we obviously have lots of news stories on our site, and this month's top story was...
So that's what people have been reading on realestate.com?
That's right. So I was hoping it was going to be a data story. Unfortunately, it wasn't. It was actually a dream home listing. So Peter Hillier, the comedian, is selling his very large home on a very large block of land in the suburb of Plenty. So we saw around 100,000 people viewing that story over the last month.
Mainly because of him or his background?
I'd say so, yeah, definitely. I think, he's certainly got a very high profile, and I think people like to see where people live when they have high profiles.
Now, Tom, what are agents talking about right now? You're out in the marketplace with them.
I think, look, at the moment, Charles, a lot of them are saying that we've got an election coming along. This has affected our stock levels, so they're expecting... And there is a little bit of a concern, Charles, because some of those early market polls that are done that are showing that it's a neck-and-neck race at the moment between Labor and Liberal. Obviously, it's a big topic, the negative gearing. And
yeah, it's massive.
Real estate agents obviously have put their cards on the table, and they're very strong about being supportive of the Liberal Party. And I think there's a bit of a concern with real estate agents that it can affect the market. We're talking... Well, I mean, what's your view, Charles?
Well, we've been trying to avoid the political side of it. Most of the industry guys have been getting together to look at it from an industry perspective and how it impacts on consumers. Not so much whether it's Liberal or Labor. Whichever party comes in, they're going to introduce something, some sort of taxes. Negative gearing is... removal of negative gearing has been a great concern, because when it happened many, many years ago, it had such a negative impact so quickly that it was reversed very quickly within a space of 12 months, and I think that's the biggest problem associated with it. And so the guys who are involved, as I've seen around the traps, are more concerned about what might happen to the marketplace. And we're watching a significant number of investors coming back into the market now in case negative gearing's removed, so that they can get in there with the grandfather clause. They can get in before the election.
I think that you were hearing the same thing, Tom, when you were talking to potential buyers.
Yeah, and the view is that, as we were saying off camera before, Nerida, there's a view that if you're a first home buyer, you're probably happy if negative gearing went away, because there's a view that prices might drop. I think potentially tenants Is that what happened in the past, Charles?
Yeah,
the rents went
up considerably,
Right.
because if you remove the investors from the marketplace, we've already had a significant, great deal of intervention from the various bodies, RBA and so on, in whatever way they can to make it more difficult for investors to buy property. And when that started to occur, when you look at that situation, you realise then that somebody has to provide the housing.
Yes.
And we've always said that traditionally it's the governments, and the governments haven't really done a great job at it. So, you know, that's been one of the biggest things. What are some of the hot topics for you?
So, well, negative gearing is obviously is the hot topic. Some of the, I mean, we have a lot of data, and what we've been doing is having a really close look at a lot of that data. So we've got 5 million visitors to our site every month. We pretty much have every listing in Australia now. I think we've got around a 92% market share. So we do get lots of information on the sorts of properties that people are looking at. So some of the things we've been looking at, Australia's fastest moving suburbs, so those areas that are selling the quickest.
I've got some charts that we can look at as well on some of the hot suburbs.
I hope so.
Some of the world's favourite Australian.
I'm hoping they're coming up, the world's favourite.
I'm just curious, what
are they up on the screen now?
Oh, they are now. Okay, so this is Australia's fastest moving suburb. So these are the suburbs that are selling the quickest across Australia. So to give you an idea, in Victoria, typically takes on average around 40 days to sell a property. In Kalorama, which is in the Dandenong Ranges, about 40 kilometres to the east of Melbourne, properties are selling within 13 days. So Upwey also featured strongly there, selling in 15 days, and other suburbs, Central Coast, also came up there. So what's interesting, the suburbs that are selling the fastest tend to be quite similar in that they've got a median house price close to the Australian average, so I think that's at around $550,000. They're also in areas where you can get a pretty big home and a pretty big house as well. So
interesting.
Those
factors seem to be pushing stronger, oh, so not stronger, but quick sales in Australia.
There are also different countries from around the world looking at real estate in Australia, and I always find this stat really interesting because the majority of people always talk about the Chinese buyers, and that's been the biggest thing. Now, recently, one real estate company came out and blamed the fact that there weren't enough Chinese buyers, which was causing their business to change. Prior to that, there were too many Chinese buyers that were causing the price of property to go up. What sort of view do you have on where those buyers are coming from mostly? Are you noticing that in your stats?
Yeah, look, I mean, the Chinese are definitely very active on our site. So the 3 countries that are most active are people from the US, people from the UK.
Yeah, thank you.
You're waiting for the UK.
It's the thing, isn't it? When you look at the real charts, number 1 and number 2, China is not in there. Generally, is the UK or the United States.
Yes. Yes. I think that the thing with China is, though, it sort of shot up from nowhere, and I think that's probably why it's been making such a huge impact on the market.
And when you go back to those suburbs you mentioned before, what do you think it is? What do you think the popularity is that drives those suburbs?
Well, there's typically 3 things. The first is having similar people from the same country in that area. So if we have a look at people living in South Africa, their top suburb is St Ives.
Yeah, and that's, you know, we're talking off camera. Whenever I've got to do auctions in St Ives, very strong possibility that it's South African vendors, South African buyers, you know. I know you've got a franchisee that I've done plenty of auctions for that I think is South African, Ivan
that's right.
Reshnikov there.
He may not admit to it, but there's a significant number of people from South Africa moving into the Perth market, that because of the proximity. You've got a lot of people from the United Arab Emirates moving into the Perth market and into the Melbourne market, so it's quite considerable. But I've been watching very closely how there's a movement of people into New Zealand before they come through or try to get into Australia. So,
maybe up for the visa reasons.
What about some of the rental data you mentioned recently too? You've got some hot suburbs here you can show us.
Yes, yeah. Do you want to talk rental right away? Okay, all right. So the top suburbs for rental, they do tend to be either near the beach or they are inner city Melbourne. So Gold Coast and the Fitzroy, St Kilda, those sorts of suburbs featured very strongly. Also Northern Beaches in Sydney as well. So these areas, they tend to be either beachside or they tend to be in a city, catering very much for that demographic that tends to rent, which is the 20 to 34-year-olds.
Some of the stats you've also been keeping are days on the market as well on suburbs and locations, and there's some of those ones that have come up on the list. So
yes, Gold Coast
fastest moving suburbs in Australia, so they're pretty good ones to look out for. Where is Kalorama in Victoria, Tom?
I don't know. I normally come to you as the Melbourne Trust expert there. I'm not quite sure where that is.
Kalorama, Dandenong Ranges.
Dandenong Ranges.
Yeah.
Some very interesting locations here that you probably would never have heard of. The average.
The fastest moving, yeah. So
suburbs in Australia, you'd hardly ever heard of any of them.
Well, I think what's really obvious, just looking at some of these stats, is it surprised me because they weren't necessarily all in a city.
It's the price. You've got a chart on the fastest moving suburbs as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm looking at the prices here: 500,000, 464, Penrose. Croydon Hills 720, Bensville 670. So we're talking about a price bracket that is allowing people to transact real estate. We're not talking about the 2 million, 2.5 million price bracket. So obviously that's the number that the marketplace wants at the moment.
Very affordable. I think it was interesting, we've done some analysis of how people view our site and the top search categories, and typically people want bigger homes, they want more bedrooms, they want bigger blocks of land, and they want to pay on average around $650,000. So the fastest moving suburbs has been quite consistent with that data as well.
Okay. Right. And Tom, we should maybe cross to the fastest moving auctions that you've got coming up in your arena on realestate.com.
Yeah, well, these properties are on realestate.com. They've also been featured in News Corp publications around the country. So we'll move on to
the first one you've got. In Mount Waverley.
Mount Waverley, which is an area that has got a strong Asian community as well, and in fact. 1/24 Iluka Crescent, Mount Waverley, has got a price guide of 1.3 million. It's presented by Hugh Tree, and he said to me that this home here is going to appeal a lot to an Asian demographic. North-facing orientation, situated on the high side of the street, large front doors. These are 3 ticks that Chinese buyers like. And this property, as I said, 1/24 Iluka, it was featured in leader newspapers, and it's got a price guide of 1.3 million.
Do you know who's doing the auction on that one?
I don't know who's doing the auction, but I can tell you that that office is McGrath Waverley.
Right.
Okay.
Then we move on to property number 2, and property number 2 is 62 Janda Street, Robertson. This is presented by Peter Florenzos from LJ Hooker at Sunnybank Hills. 109 squares, so it's a massive home. It is a massive home, and it's only 7 kilometres out of the city. It was featured in the Quest newspaper. Charles, we have the issue in Queensland that if it's an auction, you cannot quote an auction price because it's against the legislation. So I can't give our viewers a price guide on this property, but 62 Janda Street in Robertson, Queensland. Peter Florenzos.
You know, and I'm not against that policy. I know that people prefer to see a price guide, but I've always felt that getting the reserve price when I'm standing there ready to do the auction is always the best and fairest way.
All right.
So, anyway, we're going to take a short break and then we'll come back and look at some of the stats we've got also this week, along with some other parts of real estate that I think Tom and Nerida could discuss with us.
Occasionally, people come along who are not content with simply moving things along. They want to take things further. Bored by reinvention of the superficial kind, their goal isn't to improve on what has been done before, but to totally reimagine it.
Why would humans leave Earth for Mars forever?
I'm allergic to the planet.
Nasonex Allergy targets 4 allergic responses. It gives more effective hay fever relief than antihistamine tablets. Enjoy Earth.
'Cause I'm allergic to the planet. Nasonex Allergy. 4 allergic responses. It gives more effective hay fever relief than antihistamine tablets. Enjoy Earth.
4 allergic responses. Enjoy Earth.
4 allergic responses.
It takes a unique perspective to see the whole picture. Chartered accountants help businesses to seize opportunities, prepare for future challenges, and grow industries that contribute to healthier economies. Governed by a code of ethics, they are trusted business leaders who know the importance of the bigger picture and the value of every detail. To unleash the potential of your business, choose a chartered accountant.
Have you ever looked for a hotel online? Did you notice that there are so many different prices out there for the exact same room? Well, Trivago does the work for you and instantly compares the prices of over 600,000 hotels from over 200 different websites. So instead of searching for hours or spending too much, Trivago makes it easy for you to find the ideal hotel for the best price. Just go to Trivago, type in where you want to go, and with 2 clicks, select your check-in and check-out dates and search. It's that simple. Trivago searches hundreds of websites at the same time and shows you the most popular hotels. You can adjust the price so that it fits in with your budget, or select the number of stars, or filter by average guest ratings from over 100 million reviews. Remember, Trivago shows you all the different prices for the exact same room. And that's how you can be sure that you find your ideal hotel for the best price. Hotel Trivago.
Right now, with a new NAB personal credit card, you'll enjoy 0% on purchases and 0% on balance transfers for 15 months. Apply today.
Fly Sydney to Rome from $1,640 in economy class. Visit Etihad.com or your travel agent.
So, Nerida, ask you a question, if you don't mind. How hard is it now for buyers, when you look at the way it is, how hard is it for home buyers for the first time trying to get started?
Look, it is hard for first home buyers. So the proportion of lending to first home buyers is now at its lowest level since 2004. But we are seeing a lot of variability across the states. So in states where we're seeing poor economic growth, such as Western Australia, South Australia, Tasmania, we're seeing significant drops. Victoria is still increasing. So first home buyer activity is increasing in that state despite strong price growth. New South...
Tom and I need to know because we want to buy our first home together.
Okay.
We're making a big announcement.
It's about time.
To tell everybody about our first home, Tom. Yes. So New South Wales, you're saying?
So New South Wales still lack of supply in that market. So going very well economically, but there's still not enough supply. So a lot of catch-up still needs to be done.
It's a hard call, and again, first-home buyers have the biggest issue of deciding to buy a first home that they can afford rather than where they want to live. That's always been the biggest thing. How do you find with a first home buyer trying to get their initial deposit, say their initial deposit?
Charles, when I got my auction hat on and I'm auctioning and I meet the buyer and that, these are the sorts of things I see. I often see a parent with them, and the parent seems to be supportive in the process, and occasionally you'll hear the son say, give the dad a hug, thank you so much. So there's obviously that there's been some sort of support there. The other time I find it interesting is in the inner city, you have people that aren't even related, that they get together and buy a property. So it could be people that have gone...
It was a very traditional thing back in my day, and a lot of the new Australian families, they'd all get together and they'd buy all these sites together, and before you knew it, they had development sites, and down the track they were doing so well with them. So
Correct.
It's a hard call, and I know when I bought my first home, my dad guaranteed a deposit for me, and it was just the nicest thing he could ever do, but it got me started on my first property. I was only lying about Tom and I buying our first home together. So where do you see the biggest increase in first home buyer activity at the moment?
So it's Victoria and Queensland. So Queensland...
Price related, would you say?
Well, not really, because Victoria is the second most expensive state, so it's certainly not price related. I think it's economic growth in that, well, particularly Victoria. So I think people have confidence that their wages will grow. They've got confidence that they'll continue to have jobs, and that really influences that. It's also supply related. So both Queensland and Victoria have had really high levels of supply, and it just means more housing for people to buy. So more housing for investors, more housing for first home buyers, just really more to go around.
You know, you talk about investors. I'm really quite terrified about what can happen because of the unknown with the investors.
In the investor market right at the moment?
Knocked out of the marketplace if we're not careful. You know, that's the biggest thing. There was a chap asking a question recently about should he be selling his property now before the election because it's an established property and he's going to be limited to who he could sell his property to when he goes to sell after the election. Should he sell now? So that's one of the big questions. What do you think first home buyers could do, Tom, to afford a property right now? What are some of the recommendations you can make?
Okay, so I think one of the things is that just changing their perspective about where that first home might be and what condition it might be. Because I think Charles, you talked about it earlier. It was a strategy that happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago. People have to understand you might not be able to buy in the inner city and to have the perfect home. So there are lots of places in Australia and lots of places in New South Wales and Melbourne that you can actually buy property, as we've seen from Nerida's charts, for $500,000. Now, realistically, if you got yourself together a deposit of $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, all of a sudden you're in the marketplace to own real estate in New South Wales and Melbourne. So tip number one would be change your perspective and just get into the market than looking for the perfect property in the perfect suburb. And number two is understand that you're going to have to probably hustle and grind, working hard for a couple of years, and you might see people doing a second job just to get that deposit.
Early on. I mean, it's interesting on our site, we've had a look at the number of listings under $500,000 and 2/3 of them are at that price point. So that was surprising to us. We tend to always think of, Sydney at $1 million median house price, Melbourne not far below that. But if you look nationally, there is a lot of housing at that cheaper price point.
Well, going to the stats, you can see how close my stats match your stats and your stats now. Okay, so this is what happens out in my world. We'll start off with the auction clearance rates, and this week they were 70.4% across the nation. The interesting thing was they were again 78.5% this time last year. Sydney performed the best at 76.7%, and that was followed by Melbourne at 71.4%. If you take the western suburbs out of Sydney, they would have been up in the high 80s, maybe even early 90s. So there's a difference. The best performer is Brisbane. Brisbane performed better not in terms of its clearance rate, but because it's the only capital city that was higher this time than it was this time last year. All of them were below this time last year, so that's the best performing one overall. The listing numbers, which is something we always like to talk about, Chris likes to ask me, they increased by 1.25% this week over last week. So that's a pretty good jump in the listings, but they're 11.59% up over this time last year. Now, here's the negative. On the other side of the ditch in New Zealand, they were down 12% over this time last week. So that's an interesting stat to watch the difference in these two marketplaces. They seem to be juggling with each other, so quite interesting there. Their listings have been coming down again slightly for the last few weeks, so not sure what's happening in that marketplace overall. The rent movement price, again, we had a big shift in the rent movement price. It was a negative 0.24% over this time last week and a negative 0.48% since the start of the year. But the worst performer was Hobart. It came down 1.99% over last week, and that was followed by Darwin at 1.08%. So there's a downward trend at the moment, which isn't bad. It's not a big downward trend. Vacancy rates, again, that's the last one we like to cover. Sydney was the best performer. Melbourne was performing better than Sydney for some time, but Sydney came in at a fantastic 1.98% in its vacancy rate, followed by Melbourne at 2.47%, and that was also then followed by Perth, which is still struggling at 7.04%, giving an average across those three capital cities of 3.83%. So there you have it. They're the stats. They match what you think.
They pretty much do, yes. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say, I'm looking at that Sydney chart. The market's good again.
Market's good in Sydney.
It's good. I think I've got 90% in the last 8 weeks of auctioning. Wow. I think ever since they cut rates, the buyers are back in there. So it did go soft for a few months, but.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that surprising price jump in Sydney as well. So we saw the 3.1% jump over May.
Thank you very much, Nerida. Nerida Conisby from Real Estate Senior. Give me your title quickly.
Chief Economist,
Chief
Charles.
Economist, and Tom Panos, well, Real Estate Guru. That's as best as I can say.
Call me a
thank
chief.
You very much. Thank you very much for joining us. Look forward to seeing Chris back from his holidays sometime soon.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.